And I think the death penalty is like that. How do you teach, your children not to kill, the young people in your society not to kill by killing? We call, when you hit somebody else in public, we call it assault. When you kill somebody in public, we call it justice. And it doesn't make sense.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the RavenCast for September 15th to 2017. I'm your host, Adam Erickson, and the RavenCast is part of the Raven Review, an online magazine where we write and talk about mimetic theory and the rivalry and violence and scapegoating that so often divides our communities. Our motto at the Raven Review is change your view, change the world. So if you like to hear new perspectives on religion, politics, pop culture, and current events, perspectives that seek to bridge divides and bring people together, then please subscribe to the Raven Review at ravenfoundation.org. But today, I'm so excited because we have with us the Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood. Hi, Jeff.
Hey.
How's it going today?
Man, I just got off a run. I hope you can't tell.
No, it's all good. Jeff is changing our view and changing our world when it comes to the death penalty with his latest book, The Execution of God, Encountering the Death Penalty. Jeff is an ordained Southern Baptist minister. He's a theologian, social activist. And Jeff, I'm just going to say you're a modern day prophet.
I don't know.
You don't know. Good. That makes you even more of a prophet because prophets should not claim prophethood for themselves. It should always come from someone else.
My wife definitely doesn't think I'm a prophet.
No. Good for her. That's awesome. Well, Jeff is the author of 18 books. Jeff, you're very prolific.
Yeah, I just keep on writing.
But it's awesome. And he's appeared on many news media outlets. I can't name them all. I'll just name a few. Washington Post, Time Magazine, Huffington Post, Los Angeles Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox News, and NPR, among many others. Nicely done there, Jeff.
Too many, man. Too many.
That's awesome. You can also find Jeff at his website, revjeffhood.com, his Pathos blog, Exploring Radical Theology, and on Facebook at the Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood. And Jeff tweets at RevJeffHood. So, Jeff, once again, not enough. I can't handle Twitter. It just goes by too fast. Facebook.
Yeah, I'm not a big Twitter fan.
Yeah. So, but anyway, Jeff, thanks for being with us today.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
So you have these 18 books, and your latest book, The Execution of God, Encountering the Death Penalty, just came out on Tuesday. It's published by Chalice Press, and our friends at Chalice Press wanted me to mention that for our live audience, that it is on a special discount today at chalicepress.com. So people can go over there and purchase the book for 30% off by putting in the promotion code HOOD30. That's all capitals, HOOD30. And you can get the 30% discount on this fantastic book. And Jeff, I just want to tell people that it's worth full price of the book. So go, if you can't get it by the end of today at midnight, go buy it anyway. It's a fantastic book, The Execution of God, Encountering the Death Penalty. So we do have a live audience with us today. So thanks everyone for being here. If you have a comment or a question for Jeff, you can put that in the attendee chat room over there on the left-hand side. And I will bring you in as long as you're asking good, thoughtful, nice questions. All right? Okay? Yeah. So Jeff, thank you for writing this book. It is a great mix of personal story and theology. And as somebody who reads a lot of books, it's really refreshing to find somebody who can write beautifully the personal and the theological that's woven together. I mean, this is what the incarnation is all about. Right? I mean, the incarnation is God coming to us and sharing our story. So it's beautifully written. So thank you for it. Yeah. It is about first, for the people who are watching the live stream or the video, you have this fantastic sign above your right shoulder that says Jesus is queer. Matthew, what chapter? Matthew 29?
25.
Or 25? 25. Let's just get right into it. Like, what is queer about Jesus? I'm sure for a lot of people, this is going to like rub them in a certain way, probably the wrong way. And what is Matthew 20? What is so important about Matthew 25 for you? You've written a book on the courage to be queer. That's one of your books. So what do you mean by this?
So when God created us in the image of God, when you think about the person of God, the being of God, the isness of God, you're talking about someone who is non-normative, who completely blows our normativities out of the water, is beyond normativity. And I believe that in our perfect state, we are created in the image of God, so we are created to be queer. And I believe that Jesus, ultimately is the perfect example of that. What it means to live into queerness, what it means to be different, what it means to be incarnational. And I think in that incarnational presence, we see what we are supposed to be. Taking up the cause of the poor, the hungry, the prisoner, and not just doing those things in a way that is charity, but doing those things in a way that is incarnational. And I think that when we talk about Jesus being queer, Jesus is with the LGBT community and with the community in a way that I feel like is unique and has ushered us into a period of spiritual awakening over the last couple of years, and I think has truly changed the world. And so queerness is always about pushing back against normativity, of course, but also the common narratives on the way the world is supposed to be. Like I see nonviolence as a really queer construct in a world of tremendous violence, and even love. I mean, I say that love is one of the queerest constructions of them all. I mean, we're taught now that love is fleeting and love is has no connection to commitment and all of these different things. Expendable, I guess, is a good word, but nevertheless, and I feel like for me, in our churches, there's a lot of normativity. There's not a lot of queerness, and so I'm very much an anti-institutionalist. I have a deeply despise institutional Christianity, institutional worship, and so, anyways.
Yeah. What does Matthew 25 have to do with all of this? And this is fundamental in your book as well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when Jesus says, "What you've done to the least of these, you've done to me." I heard a sermon one time that said, "We're all the least of these," at one time or another in our lives, and I think that's total bullshit. I mean, I don't think that's what Jesus was saying.
Right.
I think this is making a specific reference to, those who are like, having to live in shit and, what it means to go to the shit and smell like the shit.
It sounds to me a lot like the people who are wanting to say all lives matter.
Yeah. I mean, I find it disgusting. I mean, this afternoon, we just removed our largest Confederate monument in Dallas, and we fought long and hard for that. And so now all you have is a stone base, and for 5 hours tomorrow, Confederate white supremacist, neo-Nazi folks are gonna, rally outside around this stone base in protest of this. this statue being removed, and I got called and asked to do an interview this afternoon, and they said, well, what will be the gist of what you say? And I said, well, the gist of what I say will be, we won. I mean, the monument's gone. And so I think what it means to be incarnational in that space is to speak prophetically. And I think speaking prophetically, and I think Jesus would have said something like this, where you say, hey, asshole, like, get a life. There's so many other, and I told a journalist, I said, she asked me if I was going to do a counter protest. And I said, for what? Again, we already won. And I'd rather be at home with my kids. I spend a lot of time at protests and in the streets, and that's really important to me. But when there's nothing to protest, I'm not interested in being out there.
Yeah. So I want to get into the execution of God right away. This book is about the death penalty. And the death penalty, much like taking down monuments, is sadly a super controversial issue, especially as you talk about throughout the book in the South. And you are a Southern Baptist minister. And I'm just fascinating to ask, how did you become so passionate about the death penalty?
I was first introduced to the issue, like a lot of other persons of my generation, by Helen Brajan's work. And I remember seeing Dead Men Walking in high school. And I think I even watched it on VHS. But that's a whole nother story. But, so to see someone living out their faith in a way that, causes them to walk literally through the valley of the shadow of death, and seeing her do that in a way that was so selfless and so incarnational, I was absolutely amazed. And it's interesting, before I guess the rest of my theology changed, my views on the death penalty changed. And because having been raised in evangelical, there was this pro-life rhetoric, and I ultimately realized, how can we be pro-life and then be pro-death at the same time? And so, I guess things started to change as I was studying at Emory. The Troy Davis case became, very popular is not the right word, but people became very aware. Woke is probably a good term, but and so, it really drew me in. And I remember people, talking about innocence. And I remember thinking to myself, like, who gives a shit? Like, what difference does it make if he's innocent or guilty? Like, this is about killing someone. And when we kill someone, we are going against the will of God. We're going against ourselves, and we're going against our communities. And, I find it, I guess that was the time where I learned what it looked like to be, to go even further, what it looks like. I think about the woman caught in adultery, and, Jesus, you who are without sin, cast the first stone. We love that little quote. We love to, cite that all the time. But what we don't talk about is the fact that Jesus was, there in the dirt with the woman. I believe perhaps between the woman and the Pharisees, and he was prepared to die to save her life. And I think that that's the message of Jesus, and our interactions with the death penalty. I think we have to be willing to die to save lives. And
you make that point throughout your book, that we have to put our bodies in the way.
We can't believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus and not believe in the bodily resurrection of Jeff, or the bodily resurrection of Adam. And I believe that Christ is consistently dying and rising. That's the nature of the incarnation. And so for us, as we push against evil, um, I think that we give our body to do that, and evil never wins. There's always a resurrection.
Yeah, yeah. You tell a story about Troy Davis and your grandma, and one of the things that you say that the kind of linchpin to abolishing the death penalty is seeing the image of God in everyone, and this is this is one of the fundamental stories of our faith. Can you tell us the story of coming home and having a shirt that says "I am Troy Davis" and how your grandma responded to it?
Right. It's a crazy story, a funny story, a spiritual story, a theological story. But yeah, so I had on my grandmother's maiden name was Davis, and I had a loose memory of that. I don't know about you or anybody else that's watching this, but you think about your grandparents as grandma, grandpa, but you don't, with your grandmother, you don't think a lot about like their maiden name, and in the same way, I think most people don't think about ancestry at all, even with their grandfather or whatnot. But nevertheless, I come into her house, and I didn't really think about like the shirt or like what I had on, but she like screamed out, and for her, it represented her brother, whose name was Troy Davis, and he had been injured in World War II, and it's fascinating to me to see that connection. How she wasn't, for all intents and purposes, rather racist and pro-death and pro-war and a lot of other things, but she didn't spend any time on those things. She spent a lot of time reminiscing and thinking about her brother. And it was a fascinating moment to me because what it speaks of, and I feel like the connection is that human connection. What does it look like to see these folks on death row as our family, as intimately connected to who we are? And we always say an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere, but we don't believe that an injustice against those that we have dehumanized is a dehumanization of everyone, which to me is very much reality.
Yeah. Let's talk about justice, because a lot of people think that when they support the death penalty, it's about justice. For example, you tell a story about being at a park with your children and meeting a man named Max, right? And he believed that the death penalty was about justice, and you had this really great response to him. Can you tell that story?
Sure. I need to look in the book, but on a very basic level, the question becomes how do you want to be treated? And it's interesting that some of the poorest and most marginalized people in our society are those who support injustice the most.
Yeah.
There's an old book by Wayne Flint, who's a history professor at Auburn. All right, he's retired now. Was a history professor at Auburn, and he's got a book called "Poor but Proud," and it's about poor white people in Alabama. And I've always been fascinated about Max and others who remain very proud despite their circumstances. And on one hand, that's a really great thing, but on another hand, it's all about like as y'all speak of, it's all about turning violence on someone else in order to deflect violence from yourself, and not believing that that love in yourself is enough, but believing that as y'all speak of, that you have to scapegoat evil. And with our children, I think a lot about what does it look like? People talk a lot about, especially nonviolent folks, pacifists. they talk about how they're very, I guess, harsh or really push their kids to believe these things, and we kind of just like let our kids hit each other, and kind of go at it, and we'll say, okay, well, what did that accomplish? Like,
Mm-hmm.
does that change anything? And most of the time they say, well, no, it didn't. And I think the death penalty is like that. How do you teach your children not to kill, the young people in your society not to kill by killing?
Yeah.
We call, when you hit somebody else in public, we call it assault. When you kill somebody in public, we call it justice, and it doesn't make sense.
What is? Oh man, we're getting a loud noise. Don't know what that is.
Oh, it's sorry. There's a lawnmower outside.
Oh, that's okay. Good. Awesome. Good. I'm glad it's not with the computer. It's good.
No. It's actually my kids busted my front window, so I have a board up and some I guess a plastic trash bag. And hold on one second. I've got
Sure. Yeah.
I've got somebody joining me.
Oh, awesome. Fantastic. Yes. I love it.
So that's why you can hear the lawnmower so much.
Yeah, good. Awesome. Well, what is justice? Like, killing people is not just. The death penalty is not just. What is justice? When we talk about,
I can't remember who said this, but certainly it's love in action.
Yeah.
And I think when, like, I think about all of the European societies who spend so much time on these questions, and you have people living in prisons that are rehabilitation facilities. You've got countries that even for murder, they have a 40-year sentence, and that's it. And I mean, obviously 40 years is a long time, but there's this idea that people can be rehabilitated. People can be, the way you love somebody is not locking them up and throwing away the key. And I've also seen this movement of prisons without walls, where if you wanted to, you very easily could run out, but they don't have any escapes because they all feel valued, and they want to be in the space to, I guess, help themselves. And so,
one of.
Okay.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the essential Christian ideas is redemption. And you talk about in the book how the death penalty is a denial of the idea of redemption. And that I think is what restorative justice, a justice that heals, is all about, is to try to bring people to a sense of redemption, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I use this imagery sometimes, a little bit crude, but I use this imagery sometimes. I say that, the death penalty is like pissing on the blood of Christ. And it's that disrespectful to, what Christ did, in our lives, because it denies the perpetual incarnation of Christ. And, so he's not interested. The execution of Adam Ward, which I was arrested that night for protesting, crossing into a restricted area. It's like, Adam Ward's family doesn't matter. The family of the victims don't matter. I mean, nothing matters except our thirst for blood, and it's our fault. I mean, it's our fault as Christians that we have these ideas of the atonement, where blood has to be shed in order to, I guess, avenge the shedding of blood, and it doesn't make sense. I mean, how can you teach not to kill by killing?
Right.
I mean, how can you teach not to hate by hating? How can you teach not to dehumanize by dehumanizing? And so I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Last Words from Texas, and it's a devotional based on the last words of people who are being executed. And it's a strange book, but nevertheless, one of the guys in the 80s, I can't remember his name, but one of the guys in the 80s, his final words were, I came in here a sinner and I'm going out a saint. And and I've always thought that's a deeply theological statement that really speaks to, we look at these people as pieces of shit. And then you got to ask yourself, who's the real piece of shit? The person murdering somebody on a gurney, a helpless person on a gurney, or, this person who committed a crime a long time ago and who might or might not have changed. I think it's crazy.
You write very provocative sentences throughout the book, and one of them is that here it is, that these folks who are on death row are often the best spiritual guides out there. And I know that you've done a lot of prison ministry, and I'm just wondering if you can unpack that statement a bit for people.
I was talking to a guy on death row a couple of years ago, and he said, he was telling me about his crimes, and he was talking about chopping off heads and ripping out eyeballs and all kinds of just craziness. And you want to get down? Okay. All kinds of craziness, and in the midst of that, he said, "Does God still love me?" And it reminds me so much of when Jesus looks at the disciples and says, "Do you love me?" And the question becomes, we got blood, eyeballs, heads, all kinds of stuff on the floor. And the person who put them there is saying, "Do you love me?" And there is something deeply spiritual and deeply salvific about such a thing. I talk about the gurney as the altar of God. I believe every time we execute someone, that the person of Christ is in that person. I mean, the gurney even looks like a cross. And Christ is in that person. Christ is redeeming, and Christ is saving not just that person, but saving us through the realization that this is wrong, and not just wrong, but this is destroying our society and our souls.
Yeah, you write that the death penalty is almost the linchpin for all of these other evils. Like the death penalty
I definitely think it's a meta issue. I mean, if the government has the right or the power to take human life, then the government has the right to do anything else that it wants to do. And, I'm just not, I'm a big civil liberties guy. I'm not really interested in the government having the right to take life. I think it is quintessentially wrong. We always, we get, pissed off when, we think the government's tapping our telephone. Oh my God. I mean, what if they're tapping, poison into your veins? Is that not a bigger issue?
Yeah. And you write that if the government can do this to one person, they can do it to anyone. It gets back to this idea that guilt and innocence aren't really what matter in all of this. There's the question of whether somebody is truly innocent or truly guilty, but we find that a lot of people who are innocent get killed anyway when they're on death row.
Well, the question. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, this is what Jesus reveals, right? Jesus was accused of being guilty, by his fellow human beings. And it gets
Right,
back to the
right.
whole it gets back to the whole atonement question that you brought up. I think one of the ways that we get you say that it's bad theology that leads us to the death penalty. And one of the bad theologies is, I was listening to a politician a couple years ago who was running for president 10 years ago or something. And he was saying
Right.
that he supported the death penalty because the father killed the son in order to pay for the sins of the world. And so we should be allowed to do the death penalty because we're just imitating the father. It's just this horrific theology that we teach one another. And how do we deconstruct that?
I think that, well, first of all, it comes to your view of God. I mean, like, if you believe that God, murdered his son, then, I mean, that's a really fucked up theology.
Right? Yes. Amen to that.
I think it's deeply, deeply problematic. But if you believe that God, out of God's own volition, came to earth to give the person of God, the being of God, to be with humanity, there's great love in that. I think all of these ideas of the atonement that we hold on to so tightly, I mean, are just lunacy. I mean, like, how can you love your neighbor as yourself at the same time you are killing them? I mean, that speaks to war. It speaks to the death penalty. It speaks to capitalism. We live in a society that is evil. I mean, pure and simple. It is evil. Everybody, says that I hate America and all this kind of stuff. And I don't hate people in America, but what our society has become is deeply problematic. We trust in God. We trust in killing. We trust in murder. And, I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago when I was involved in the protest before the Dallas shooting. And I organized the rally before the protest. And, I screamed out. This got a lot of, I actually got my first Breitbart article written about me based on what I said. And I said, it was crazy. They said I was an Islamist. They said I was gay. They said on and on and on. And I told my wife, I said, they must not know, like, those things don't bother me that much. But nevertheless, I screamed out at the rally, "Goddamn white America." And what I was saying was, goddamn this construction that America is white. And I also think, I would be willing to say goddamn America, because I think we have to damn that which is evil and that which is wrong. It doesn't mean damn the American people. It means that, this is wrong. It's wrong to kill people. It's wrong to marginalize and oppress people. On and on and on. My oldest son, Jeff, he always is talking about, he always says, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong. And, of course, he's talking about his brother stealing his candy. But on a fundamental level, I think that the church has become, especially progressive Christians, to me, are such weenies that they refuse to talk about evil. And if we don't talk about evil, how can we push back and bring about resurrection and restoration in our society? The death penalty is not just, a problem. It's not just a social justice issue. It is evil, and it makes us evil. And until we understand that, the church is not going to have a prophetic voice on this issue and a number of others.
Yeah, the Hebrew prophets were always saying that if you do not follow the teachings of God, that the nation is going to fall. And this is exactly what you are saying and what Jeremiah Wright was saying when you use words like "goddamn America." It's just the ancient Hebrew prophetic tradition that says that if you do not care for the poor, the weak, the marginalized, that God has set up the world in such a way that the nation will fall. And this is, I
Right.
think, an important prophetic message that we need to hear today. So
Yeah.
whatever Fox News,
Yeah.
I know that you had an interview with Fox News and they grilled you pretty hard on it. But I love the way that you're doing it. So
Yeah, that was a tough interview.
yeah,
You know,
but
I
but it
tell
also
people,
brings up it
go ahead.
also brings up I think it also brings up a fair question when we're confronting evil. Is you write in the book about mercy and how violence begets violence, and we need to move towards more mercy in the
Right.
world, right? And how do we
Right.
model? How do we? This is always the tension that I feel whenever I get into these prophetic moods. Is how do we deal with these things that are destroying our souls, our nation's soul, in a way that is both prophetic, like you're putting it out there in a way that is truthful, like God is damning us because we're doing this, but also in a
Mhm.
way that is motivated by mercy and spirit. Like I don't think the two are opposed to each other, but how do they
Right.
fit?
I think that, it is, there is something fascinating by saying we don't, we don't do it. We don't work. We don't, that's not the point. The point is about the isness of God and the isness of us. What we are, the way that we end the death penalty is to be who God created us to be in the first
Hmm.
place.
Right.
If we can speak of um, the queer God, then we can make the world queer. I mean,
Mm.
make the world love, make the world about hope and change. And I think that the conservatives always used to. When I was growing up, they always used to tell us, if you masturbate, your penis will fall off,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
if you do this or you do that, I mean, all kind. If you have sex
You'll go
before you get
blind.
married, yeah, you're,
Yeah.
scarlet letter kind of stuff. And so loving Jesus was about not masturbating,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I think in the progressive world and in a lot of other spaces, loving Jesus is about um, working against the death penalty or perhaps working against poverty, and that is complete bullshit in my mind, because
Mm.
walking with Jesus is about being who God created us to be in the first place. And so walking with Jesus is about living into ourselves. And when we live into ourselves, we we ain't gonna study, killing no more. We ain't gonna study death no more.
Hmm.
We're going to, walk in newness of life. We're going to, change the world not based on what we do, but based on who we are. And who I am is I am someone who is going to go on television and say what I feel like is the truth. I'm someone who is going to stand at the gates. People ask me all the time, "How are you going to end the death penalty in Texas?" Well, that's a really dumb, ignorant question, because we are not going to end the death penalty in Texas. We're not going to have a legislative victory that stops the death penalty. But I do think that we can slow down the death penalty by speaking to hearts and minds. And I have no problem standing in the middle of our communities screaming, "This has got to stop," even if nobody listens. Uh, because for me, it's about being and not effect. And so our only hope, which the Supreme Court has become more conservative and
Yeah.
conservative, but our only hope is for the Supreme Court to say this is cruel and unusual punishment. Um, with that said, I worked with a number of guys who have gotten stays and who are still alive. It was a gentleman I worked with who's become a really good friend of mine who had a hearing yesterday. But again, we are called to hopeless situations. We are not called. I mean, it's funny how many people are jumping on this Confederate monuments kick. I mean, where the hell were all these people 10 years ago?
Right.
On transgender issues. I mean, now that's the measure of whether you're truly progressive or not. That's bullshit. Like, trans folks have been dying for decades and nobody cared. And so I'm not saying that, if you're late to the party, you don't know Jesus. But what I am saying is, be like God, be the person God created you to be, follow Jesus the whole time. Like, it's not about, getting on the hot issue. Anybody can do that. It's about loving your neighbor as yourself, loving God as you love yourself. God is our neighbor. And so how can we love our neighbor, again, and commit all of this violence to them? I mentioned earlier, the woman caught in adultery. And again, our job is to place our body into the conversation. If our body is not placed into the conversation, we are anathema to the gospel. So how can, I think the primary question of salvation is, are you willing to give your body, to give your life for your neighbor? And by doing so, are you willing to give your body and your life for God?
Let's talk about one of the ways that you have given your body to this in your 200-mile pilgrimage.
Oh, man, that was a bad idea. No, I mean, it was a beautiful, I don't ever want to do it again, but it was a beautiful experience. I mean, I remember one night, I slept under a bridge, and I was in the middle of nowhere, and I woke up, and I opened my eyes, and there was this huge pile of shit next to my face. And I was like, what in the hell? I mean, because when I went to sleep, the shit wasn't there. And when I woke up, the next morning, obviously an animal or something is shit right next to me. With that said, I kind of took that as a spiritual awakening that, I just needed to be prepared as I marched on to, have some shit dumped on me, or at least right next to me. And I'll tell you another story that's pretty good. I was walking and I had to go to the bathroom so bad that I thought, I had on a white robe. I thought I was going to brown the white robe right then and there. And then I saw this old bar, and I can't remember what it was called. I mean, it wasn't a strip club, but it was, just a dive, to say the least. But, a bunch of, I guess, bikini-clad bartenders and, older men, slamming beers like, it's Armageddon and there'll be no more beers. But I've walked in there, and one of the guys goes, "What in the shit is that?" And so I had on a robe and my staff, and one of the guys, I said, "I'm walking against the death penalty because I oppose the death penalty." And he said something like, "I got to hear about that." And I said, "My brother," I said, "if you will let me go in here and take a shit," I said, "I will tell you everything you could ever want to know, and we'll talk. But first, I got to go in here." And, so I ended up talking to this guy and talking to, a lot of this group. And they said, I had never thought about that. I had never considered that. And, it's fascinating, when we're willing to go into these difficult spaces, these frightening spaces, these spaces, out of the way, we can begin to have conversations that are transformative. And I think I'll say this, and I'll let you hit it. But growing up as an evangelical, hold on, I got a little notification that popped up. But growing up as an evangelical, I was always taught that you have to go to places of tremendous discomfort. Now, they wanted you, in the mall to go up to strangers and, if you die tonight, are you going to heaven type thing. But that's always stuck with me because I do believe that the gospel is about discomfort in a world of normativity. And, and I think that the church is too comfortable, all of the church. I look at these big auditoriums and, your best life now, get rich quick, all this kind of stuff. And I think to myself, what is that about? Like, that's about capitalism. It doesn't have anything to do with Jesus. But anyways.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna ask. This when you're on this pilgrimage, you're going into a place that where the death penalty is rooted. It's almost a way of life as you're traveling through here, and you go into this bar. You go into this bar, and they say, "Oh, I'd never thought of it that way before." Right? What I think it might be helpful for us to know what is it that you said to them, like when you're going into this, what do you say to people that kind of reframes it for them?
I've always had the conversation this way. I'll say, I'm opposed to the death penalty. I'll start it like that. And they say, why? And I'll say, because I follow Jesus. Well, shit, I follow Jesus.
Right?
It always hits like that. And from there, I always say, well, I take them into a real gospel message. Like, evangelicals were always talking about the Roman road and all that stuff. And for me, the best way to share Jesus with someone is to share with them the love of Jesus and how that love is so powerful that it transcends our need for revenge and our need for killing and, blood atonements and all these things.
Yeah. It's beautiful. I love it. One of the people that we follow here at Raven and in Mimetic Theory is a gay Catholic theologian named James Allison.
Oh, yeah.
And James Allison. So he says that the cross is all about Jesus taking human violence upon himself and responding with the forgiveness of God. And that's where we find God. That's where we find this atonement thing. And James says that he does it so that we will stop killing one another, so that we will stop this death penalty thing from happening. And it's just always, I don't know, confusing to me, I guess, as to how we can get the message so wrong. And one of the things that you talk about in your book that was really helpful to me is about the interpretation question about the Bible, because you can look to the Bible and see a violent God, a God who is for genocide, even, right? Mm-hmm. But how do you interpret those stories in a way that leads us to Jesus, I guess, who is the one who shows us not God's nonviolent love that seeks to stop us from killing one another, to stop the death penalty?
Well, ultimately, God's not real. I mean, and what I mean by that is even the use of the word God is blasphemous, and it's very problematic. I'm very Talikian in that I very much believe in the God beyond God. And I mean, I guess I'm an atheistic theist, and but I mean, even theism is quite problematic for me.
Yeah.
And so, so I'm interested in the Jesus beyond Jesus, and I think that I talk about God in the book as being pretty much an asshole, pretty much violent, and all these things. And I think we have to have those thoughts and those conversations because most of our ideations of God are deeply problematic. So, did God kill Jesus? Well, sure. Um, did God love Jesus? Sure. The question, kind of the Trinitarian question for me, is God is in the person of Jesus, and Jesus, went through with the execution. I think a better question is, did God commit suicide? And I think that changes the way that we look at suicide and mental health and a lot of those issues. But and I'm just not. I mean, I'm just not buying that at one point God is for the death penalty, and at another point God changes God's mind. Um, I heard an old quote that I love in the way we view Scripture that says, "The credibility of Jonah does not depend on the edibility of Jonah." And I've always loved that little quote, little ditty. But I mean, the writings of Paul. I mean, I just don't believe that shit. I mean, and I'm very comfortable with that because I believe in that the revelation of God never stops. And so, I believe that the writings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. are just as important as the writings of the Apostle Paul. And I also believe that when we look at the early church and how the scriptures were constructed, deeply problematic. And so I think we should canonize the last words of people on death row. I think that if Jesus is truly with the prisoner and truly with the least of these, then those are the words of God. Those are the words of Christ. And if we cringe when, one of these prisoners says, tells the victim's family to go to hell, well, I think that we're cringing at the person of God, the person of Christ, because, someone that says something like that is saying that out of anguish. And I think we see Jesus doing that. The gospel writers, they try to paint this rosy picture, of Jesus in those last moments. But, I mean, if you were getting, whipped and beat with those, I guess all kinds of instruments, I mean, wouldn't you give them a good fuck you? I mean, to me that seems, I don't know, seems obvious. But like I said, I think God truly is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And the incarnation is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And what I mean by that is that God is in all of us. So to say that God, changes by, by, I guess, the decade or the year. I mean, God is incarnational. God is being, and God is in us. God is. So to take away that isness of God, gives us an ability to do all of these other, tremendously violent things. The death penalty is a salvific issue. Think about it like this. For God so loved the executed that God gave the executeds God gave God's only begotten executed, that whosoever believes in the executed shall not perish, but have everlasting life. That is the gospel. That's the message of Matthew 25. That's the message of Jesus. And that's the message that will change our world.
Amen. Amen. I think that's a great way to end it. So thank you again.
Madeline, you want to come say hey? Come here.
Come on over and say hi. Hi.
Can you say hi? Can you wave it down?
Yay. Thanks for sharing your daddy with us. That was awesome.
Yeah, I am I am Mr. Dad most days. I keep our three youngest ones. They're
Yeah.
twins. They're two, and then I have another one in there, probably 10 in the living room apart, remodeling the house, and he's
Nice.
3. And
That's what they do.
then we have twins that are 5. So twins that are
Mm.
5, 3, and twins that are 2. So a lot of people, talk to me about doing this work and risking my life and risking my family in order to do this work. And I always say, I don't want my children to ever reach a point where they don't know that I love the world. I want them to learn to love the world and truly change the world, and also that I haven't done everything I can to accomplish those things. But
Yeah,
man, this guy is a hot box, man. He's sweating all over me.
yeah, it's good.
Man,
Well,
he's
Jeff,
a sweater.
that's awesome. Thank you again for this
Thank you.
conversation, for your book. You're just inspiring. And
Well, thank you. I thank you to Chalice for publishing it. I didn't think anybody was going to publish it.
Well, they were smart to do it. So here it is, The Execution of God, Encountering the Death Penalty. Once again, you can purchase it today, September 15th, for 30% off. Go over to chalicepress.com and enter the promotion code HOOD30. That's capitalized HOOD30 for your discount. And Jeff, if people want to stay connected with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, so certainly my fan page on Facebook is a very good place to do that because I'm constantly checking those messages. I'm not really all that good at email. Facebook is kind of my, I guess launching pad or I guess home base, if you will. So
yeah,
it's pretty easy. Sis,
good, awesome.
Well,
Oh, that's good. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us. My friend Mary McKinney says, thanks, Adam and Jeff. We've listened the whole time. And we like the babies as part of it, too. So awesome. That's great. So thanks, everybody.
I'm going to take a screenshot.
Awesome.
Lynn, turn around. That's perfect.
There we go. Fantastic. And
all right,
everybody, you can stay. All right. Stay up to date on the RavenCast by joining the RavenCast group page on Facebook. You can also like the Raven Foundation Facebook page. If you're watching on YouTube, please like the video and share it with your friends. And if you're listening to iTunes or Stitcher, please subscribe and leave a 5-star review. One more thing, go on over to the Raven Review and ravenfoundation.org and subscribe. That'll make sure you stay up to date on our articles and other fascinating interviews just like this one. So until next time, grace and peace be with you, my friends. Bye-bye.
Thank you.